station, where unknown forces strike the edge of ecology.
Okay, it's Monday, July the 2nd, 2012, and this afternoon I had an emergency email from my brother Martin, I'm Peter of the Information, saying that Ian Crane was doing a talk in Brighton at the Brighton Ballroom in Kemptown, quite near me. I didn't know about this, so I popped down to the venue and I see that it's part of the Ecology Festival, which is running all this week. So I've set this machine running, and hopefully we'll do a recording. It starts at 7:15, well 7:30, and Ian's going to be talking about the false flag attack possibility on the Olympic Games in a few weeks' time in London, and that's really going to start on the the 26th or the 27th. I'm just going to look at the calendar because I've written these dates down. Yeah, Olympics starts on the 27th, Friday, with a very strange opening ceremony all about the countryside, which we often like to trash in real life. We suddenly want to celebrate it in East London for some reason, with a fake set up at the Olympics, and no information has been received about the closing ceremony. So Ian's mainly going to be speaking about that, we understand. So here we are at the ballroom, I guess very, very soon.
Your story. And in doing that, you have to be able to read between the tucked away truths, the half-truths, and the complete falsehoods that are contained therein, which is so important, particularly right now, in this current climate. So, without further ado, let me say that those who believe themselves to be the rightful rulers of a planetary peacetime really do have nowhere to run and nowhere to hide when their veil of deception, secrecy and outright lies is lifted and ripped away by Ian R. Crane.
Thank you. Let's put this down here. Otherwise it's going to fall into the ground. Good evening. What a fantastic turnout. Because we might not have had quite such a large turnout, of course, if we'd have had real July weather. So a little bit of rain. Yeah. There's obviously no sport on tonight either, right? No football. So, by definition of the fact that you're here, you already have some idea of what's occurring, and you already appreciate that what is being fed to us by the mainstream media is a mixture of truths, half-truths, and just outright bullshit, basically. And of course the challenge is to discern. And these are the skills that I believe that more and more people are developing. They're developing them naturally. The capability and capacity to apply discretion and discernment to everything, to what we read, to what we see, to what we hear, to what we're told, etc. And then try to establish for ourselves what's really going on. And of course the big difference between what we do in the alternative community and what the role of the mainstream media is that we don't expect you, I certainly don't expect you to take anything that I say at face value. In fact, I'd be pretty mortified if you re-quoted me without actually checking the facts yourself. You know, the role of the mainstream media is to tell people what to think. It's to save them the hassle of having to really do any research for themselves. Which is why I'll put my hand up and say that I am an avid reader of The Sun and the Daily Mail. In fact, I may be one of the only readers of The Sun. But the reason I read these papers is because by reading these two, just these two, I mean there's others, but these two address supposedly, about 17 million people. So by reading these two papers, I've got a pretty good idea what the vast majority of people in this country believe to be the gospel truth. So that's the start point. And I will have to say that over the last, I would say probably 18 months or so, the Daily Mail has started to run some very, very interesting articles. Of course, for the vast majority of people, probably just go straight over their head. But nonetheless, it would be wrong to say that we're not actually being told what's going on. But there's a downside to that, of course, and that is that those who believe themselves to be the rightful rulers of this planetary fiefdom absolutely believe that if they tell us what they're going to do and we don't react, then effectively we give them a mandate to pursue their agenda. So the three most powerful tools that they have in their armoury are our apathy, our willful ignorance, and the most powerful tool of all, abdication. Abdication. Because by definition, that means that, we've got a pretty good idea of what's going on, but we're too fucking lazy to get off our butts and actually do anything about it. In other words, it's not affecting us right now. We have to wait, in many cases, for it to get right up close and personal for us to actually take an interest. But of course what's occurring right now is it's actually doing that. It's getting up close and personal with more and more people, as we're going to see as we go through. Because I'm not just going to talk about the Olympics, because to talk about the Olympics in isolation really doesn't explain what's occurring here. The Olympics is simply part of a much bigger picture. And in the course of this evening, I'm really only going to get an opportunity to scratch the surface. But hopefully it'll stimulate your own interest and you will go away and take a look at some of this stuff yourself. But here we are. What are we now? Less than 4 weeks before the opening ceremony of the London Olympics. It's 4 weeks on Friday. 4 weeks on Friday, the 27th of July. And I think we're coming into a very, very interesting period. So is there anybody in the room who thinks that 2012 is just a random year? No? So everyone thinks there is something significant about this year. Well, for a lot of people it revolves around maybe their awareness of the Mayan calendar. But maybe there's something way more to this than just the Mayan calendar. Maybe that's linked in. And I'm going to share some of that with you this evening. But first, we have to take a look at what's occurring right now in terms of the bigger picture. And of course the key issue in the media today is the economic collapse, the global financial meltdown. So is there anybody in the room who thinks that this is just a very unfortunate economic situation? Nobody could have foreseen it coming, and we've just got to work our way through it?
Not many.
No. Well, good. Because if this was the 5th day, the 5th week, or even the 5th month of a global financial collapse, then perhaps it could be argued that nobody saw it coming and we just got to find a solution and work our way through it. But we're in the 5th year. The 5th year. And how many solutions have you heard put forward to what's occurring right now? None. None. Because that's the game plan. That's deliberate. Those of us who do or have the opportunity to take a look at the deep geopolitical agenda, we saw it coming. Not because we claim any special insight, we simply read the scripts. Because once again, it was all put out there for us. Coupled with which, everything that was going on between the year 2000, certainly 2002, but even a little bit before, but from 2002 to 2007, it was exactly the same as what was occurring between 1926 and 1929. Exactly the same. So call it a hunch, it was a pretty fair bet that the end result was going to be exactly the same. Because the guys who try and pull these stunts, they're not particularly original or creative. That's why Tony Blair said, let's not bother teaching history in schools. Because otherwise people might actually realise that we're not really that clever and we've only got a couple of templates and we're going to have to keep using them time and time again. Of course, Tony is the archetype of the socio-psychotic. But maybe we'll see more about him later. He's only earned 20 million this year. Tough year. Tough year. By the way, if anybody ever wanted any categoric proof that Tony Blair is a socio-psychotic, it's on an interview which is nigh on impossible to find on the web right now, funnily enough, And it's Andrew Marr. Now, Andrew Marr is no paxman, but nonetheless, he does know when he's got the bit between his teeth, and he'll keep champing away. Well, there was an interview he did with Tony Blair some time ago now, it's probably about a year, maybe a little bit more ago, and he said, "So, Mr. Blair, how do you actually sleep at night?" Knowing that 500,000 civilians have been killed in Iraq, all on the back of non-existent weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah.
And his response was, Andrew, I think you'll find it was only 100,000. So that makes it all right then. Any one of us would be mortified if we thought that any of our words or deeds had caused serious injury to another human, let alone resulted in 500,000 deaths or even 100,000. But this is the socio-psychotic. That's why they're gagging to get Tony Blair back into politics. The guy has no comprehension. He has no capacity for empathy.
No.
He doesn't understand that the vast majority of this country consider him to be literally the manifestation of evil. But he still thinks that he's doing God's work, as do some others. Let me share this quote with you. This is from a website. The website is called SHTF Plan. SHTF stands for Shit Hit the Fan. ShitHitTheFanPlan.com. It's very interesting stuff on this website, by the way. I'm going to share another quote from this website later on this evening. But Marco Salvo said, when this Ponzi scheme finally comes down, it will be unlike anything we've ever seen in terms of economic collapse and financial asset annihilation. He goes on to say, it turns out there are whistleblowers, hundreds of them, that any attack on the establishment is met with either a full-on counterattack that targets the credibility of the individual, bringing forth the information and marginalises the content of the message by dismissing it as the ravings of a lunatic or a disgruntled employee, or it's simply erased from public view by the very institutions tasked with investigating such activity. And of course, a classic example of this is Tony Farrell. Anybody heard the name?
Yep.
Tony Farrell, former principal criminal intelligence analyst, but he only been in the job for 17 years, so he was, obviously not that experienced. 17 years as a principal criminal intelligence analyst. And when he was asked a couple of years ago to do an analysis of the terror threat from the Muslim community in South Yorkshire, where he was based, and he never had cause to question the orthodox version of events prior to that. But as he took a look at the issues surrounding the London bombings and then moved on to 9/11, he realised that basically the official stories were a complete crock of crap. And he put a report together called An Ignoble Lie, basically stating that there was no terror threat from the Muslim community in South Yorkshire. The terror threat came from the alphabet agencies operating out of London and elsewhere. When he submitted it to his bosses, they wouldn't even read it. He was fired from his job as a principal criminal intelligence analyst after 17 years. Prior to that, he was held in very, very high regard. But he was fired, and nobody read the report. Nobody read the report. And they even tried to suggest that he was crazy by getting him to go and get him an assessment from the occupational health group. So that is a classic example of how the establishment just literally pulls the blinds down and says, no, we're not going to look at that. Because it might actually force us to change our worldview. Well, Marco Salvo and many, many others, of course, have seen this coming because they're students of history. They know exactly what happened last time, and so they've got a pretty good idea of what's going to happen again. Now, this is absolutely deliberate. Has anybody here ever played the game of Monopoly? Yeah? Has anybody here ever finished a game of Monopoly? After 3 days. Did you finish though?
Sure.
You did finish. And did you win?
guess I did.
Did you? Were you the banker?
No, I wasn't.
Oh, that's a rarity. Of course, the vast majority of people have never finished a game of Monopoly because the board comes out on Boxing Day and you start to play, and after 4 hours, of course, you're ready for another round of turkey. So the board gets put away, and then the following day somebody says, "Oh, should we carry on with the game of Monopoly?" And this goes on for a couple of days, then you get bored, and eventually you simply add up the assets, cash, the houses, hotels that each of the remaining players has got, and then you decide whoever's got the most is the winner. But of course that's not the purpose of the game. The purpose of the game is to take total ownership of the board. So, the game goes through various stages. You've got to go through the initial rounds where you accumulate, the locations, and then you've got to actually barter with the other competitors, the other players, to get a complete set so that you can start building your houses and hotels. And when everybody's starting the process of developing the houses and the hotels on their locations, that's when the real game starts. And the real game is to establish total ownership of the board. Total ownership. It's last man or woman standing. And 99 times out of 100, it'll be the banker. Because if you're a banker, you have a little bit of an advantage, don't you? You're sitting on the stash of cash. And if you're running a bit light yourself, there's the temptation, apparently, that every time you go past go, instead of taking 200, you might actually slip yourself an extra 100. Well, of course, the banks have been doing this. They just call it fractional reserve banking. They just keep multiplying the fractional reserve ratio, which is effectively the amount of fake money, non-existent money, that they're putting into the economy and charging somebody interest for that. Well, the bankers are on a roll. Right now, they're on a roll. They are going for total ownership of the board, for Board Read Planet. They pretty much achieved it in Greece. They're well on the way in Ireland, Portugal, Spain. Spain, obviously, they're going to leave alone for a few days, let them savour the success that they've had on the football pitch. It's the only Euro they're going to get anything out of, that's for sure. Italy, France, and they're well away on the UK. How many British utility companies are there?
0.
Oh, that many? It's all being sold off. At Rio, before Rio, because Rio plus 20, this is 20 years after the Earth Summit in Rio, where Agenda 21 was introduced to, after those of us who research this material. Agenda 21, which is effectively a depopulation agenda. Caroline Spellman, prior to going to Rio as the environment representative from the UK, said that she was going to initiate an inventory of all of the assets in this country. The purpose of that is so that basically they can go to the central banks and borrow against those assets. So just like is the case in Greece right now, where the bankers effectively own everything. Everything. And the Greek government were actually forced to sign an agreement that said that if they want more money, they've actually got to go back to the European Central Bank and the IMF. They can't get it from anybody else, even if that somebody else comes along and offers a better rate, especially if it's China or Russia. Of course, the only country that's an exception here is Iceland. But of course, you've read so much about Iceland in the mainstream media. I mean, you're all very well versed, of course, on exactly how Iceland has managed to rebuild its economy, aren't you? I think there's been about 3 column centimetres on Iceland's recovery in the British media over the last 3.5 years. Of course, the intent is to make sure that nobody knows that there is an alternative. That there's an alternative way in which you can get yourself out of this mess. And the primary part of that is basically telling the bankers to go take a hike. Which is exactly what they've done. Not only that, of course, they put their bankers in the dock. And they've actually started putting them in prison. And yet, what are we going to get? Maybe another inquiry. Because who really can... Let's do a straw poll here. Can you put your hands up if you think that the British Parliament, the government at Westminster, actually rule this country? No? Okay, can you put your hands up if you think the banks, the central banks, rule this country?
I don't know if they do really. No.
Well, they do a pretty good job. They may not be the prime movers, but they are certainly the henchmen
It's a rough chance.
carrying out this global agenda. And of course, the guy that is doing that is this guy here, Lloyd Blankfein. This is the Chief Executive Officer of Goldman Sachs. Now, this is the guy who 3.5 years ago was given basically half of the Sunday Times magazine to present his case of how Goldman Sachs was going to save the world. And in the course of his interview, he actually said that he believed he was doing God's work. Where have we heard this before? Where have we heard it? Well, you know, I think actually they are using the term God as a euphemism. Because, you know, you have to look at really, as it was said in the intro, you have to look at what's really being said behind the scenes. So this is their God.
Oh yeah.
In which case, he wasn't lying, was he?
No.
He was absolutely speaking from the heart. He, like Blair and Bush and all these other socio-psychotics, are indeed fighting for God. Well, I'm going to show you a short interview here. Some of you will have seen this before if you've come to my talks over the last 9 months or so. But this is a very short interview, just 3 minutes, with a remarkable young man, who's younger than me anyway, called Alessio Rastani. And he gave an interview to the BBC, and he was supposedly sort of randomly selected because somebody had come across him at one of his seminars. And he was invited to go on to the BBC and do a very short interview and to explain what was happening and how we could actually find a way out of this financial mess. Well, listen to what Alessio had to say.
It's going to crash and it's going to fall pretty hard because markets are ruled right now by fear. Investors and the big money, the smart money. I'm talking about the big funds, the hedge funds, the institutions. They don't buy this rescue plan. They basically, they know the market is toast. They know the stock market is finished. The euro, as far as they're concerned, they don't really care. They're moving the money away to safer assets, like treasury bonds, 30-year bonds, and the US dollar. So it's not going to work.
We keep hearing that whatever the politicians are suggesting, admittedly it's all been rather woolly so far, isn't right. Can you pin down exactly what would keep investors happy and make them feel more confident?
That's a tough one. Personally, it doesn't matter. But I'm a trader. I don't really care about that kind of stuff. I go with if I see an opportunity to make money, I go with that. So for most traders, it's not about. We don't really care that much how they're going to fix the economy, how they're going to fix the whole situation. Our job is to make money from it. And personally, I've been dreaming of this one for 3 years. I had a confession, which is I go to bed every night. I dream of another recession. I dream of another moment like this. Why? Because people don't seem to maybe remember, but the 30s depression, the depression in the 30s, wasn't just about a market crash. There were some people who were prepared to make money from that crash. And I think anybody can do that. It isn't just for some people in the elite. Anybody can actually make money. It's an opportunity. When the market crashes, when the euro and the big stock markets crash, if you know what to do, if you have the right plan set up, you can make a lot of money from this. For example, hedging strategies is one. Then investing in bonds, treasury bonds, that sort of stuff.
If you could see the people around me, jaws have collectively dropped at what you've just said. I mean, we appreciate your candour, however it doesn't help the rest of us, does it, or the rest of the Eurozone?
Say this, listen. I would say this to everybody who's watching this. This economic crisis is like a cancer. If you just wait and wait thinking this is going to go away, just like a cancer, it's going to grow and it's going to be too late. What I would say to everybody is, get prepared. This is not a time right now to wishful thinking the government is going to sort things out. The governments don't rule the world. Goldman Sachs rules the world. Goldman Sachs does not care about this risky package, neither does the big funds. So actually, what I would actually tell people, I want to help people. People can make money from this. It isn't just traders. What they need to do is learn about how to make money from a downward market. The first thing people should do is protect their assets. Protect what they have. Because in less than 12 months, my prediction is the savings of millions of people is going to vanish. And this is just the beginning. So I would say be prepared and act now. The biggest risk people can take right now is not acting.
Alessio Rostani, thank you very much for talking to me.
You talking about the economy at night?
I try not to.
Yeah.
Let
18 minutes past 11.
Alessio Rustani. He became a web sensation. I mean, that video has, I think, had over like 3 million hits since he appeared in September of last year. Now, what's really interesting about some of the observations Alessio made, they were remarkably prescient. Because when he made his supposedly glib remark, governments don't rule the world, Goldman Sachs rules the world. Like I said, I'm not going to suggest that Goldman Sachs do rule the world, but Goldman Sachs are the mechanics. Lloyd Blankfein is the chief mechanic, tasked with bringing about the global collapse. But what Alessio could not have known when he made that observation is that within the next 6 weeks, 2 national leaders in the EU would be replaced not through any election, but they would be forced out by effectively the European Central Bank and replaced with former associates of Goldman Sachs. In Greece, the EU and the European Central Bank and the IMF went into apoplexy when Papandreou, the elected leader of Greece, suggested that there should perhaps be a referendum of the Greek people to decide whether or not Greece should enter into this outrageous austerity. Well, as soon as he said referendum, there was a horrendous campaign to basically demonise him and challenge his suitability to lead the country. And he was forced to stand down, and he was replaced by a guy called Lucas Papademos. Lucas Papademos had been the head of the Greek National Bank when Greece was making application to join the EU and subsequently the Eurozone, and he was working with Goldman Sachs to cook the books to deliberately hide the magnitude of Greece's debt, to convince the EU Commission that basically it met the financial criteria to be admitted for membership. So he committed treason, basically. And he was put into the role of head of the government. Of course, he's no longer, because Greece has had 2 elections in the last 10 weeks, and they'll probably have another one in the next 5 or 6 weeks. Then in Italy, and you can argue that Berlusconi sort of presented his head on the proverbial silver platter with his various sexual escapades. But the attitude here and in Italy may be very different. But basically Berlusconi, I think, was probably told, a little bit like Strauss-Kahn, there's clearly a lot more known about Berlusconi than is actually in the public domain. And I think somebody whispered in his ear that unless he stood down, then some of the less salubrious aspects, if there are any, would be made public. So Berlusconi stood down. He's replaced by a guy called Mario Monti, a former associate of Goldman Sachs. So Alessio could not have known that this was going to happen. But here we have the case of the technocrats effectively taking control of these countries. And in the time that Papademos was head of the Greek government, he signed over effectively all of Greek assets to the European Central Bank and the IMF. and committed future generations, almost ad infinitum, committed future generations to effectively paying back the bailout. So anybody born having the misfortune to be born in Greece, basically, they're born into debt slavery. Well, you can argue that's the case pretty much everywhere, but I mean, they're certainly born into debt slavery in a big, big way. Well, the guy that is sort of responsible for this, Lloyd Blankfein, you've met him already. But look at what he's earned in the time. In the time that the world has been going to hell in an economic handcart, he has earned the princely sum of $161 million. Nearest damn it, that's £100 million. Most of that in bonus, because his base salary is $1.1 million. That's his base salary. He didn't really only earn the base salary in 2008, but 2008 was the first full year of the global financial collapse. And obviously the compensation board decided that it would look a bit off if he received too large a bonus, or any bonus at all. So his bonus was simply deferred. So when you read that Bob Diamond or Stephen Hester are going to give up their bonuses, let me tell you, that's bollocks. What they have done is they have agreed to have them deferred. And that's why these guys won't leave. Because they actually have a vested interest in staying on the payroll. Either to pick up those deferred bonuses or to make sure that they negotiate a severance package that includes them. So we've got, Marcus Aegis, chairman of Barclays, who's said, okay, I'll resign. But he's a non-executive chairman. Okay, it calls into question the role of non-executive chairman and how much they should get involved in the business. But the reality is, he had no operating responsibility in Barclays. It's not for him to fall on the sword. It should be Bob Diamond. And of course, this is something that's going to play for a little while, because the big question now is how much the Bank of England really knew about the fixing of the LIBOR rate. In other words, this institutional fleecing of the planet. But that's exactly what he was tasked to do. He was tasked to make sure that basically we went into this final home straight to enable the global corporatists, the socio-psychotics, to take total control of everything on the planet, asset strip nations, which is happening. I mean, like we said, there's not a single utility that is owned by the British people or a British company anymore. They're all owned by France or Germany, China, and that's the same right across the world. The assets are going into the hands of a smaller and smaller and smaller number of people. Well, nearly 100 years ago, there was a cartoonist by the name of Crozier who was very, very astute. I mean, he was, back in the early part of the 20th century, there was only really a handful of people who had the courage to actually challenge what was going on in terms of the global agenda. And one of whom is a name that very few people have heard of, but he was absolutely the father of the study of deep geopolitics, and there was a guy called Alfred Mackinder. Well, Crozier's method of trying to communicate his awareness of what was going on was through cartoons. And this is from roughly about 1920. And he said, "The Rothschilds, for billions a year as interest on bonds, I rent the human race the privilege of existing on my earth. Through the private central bank scheme, I'll soon grab the United States, then all of Christendom, czars, emperors, kings, and the people all must obey my orders. Submit to my exactions or get off my earth." Crozier in the 1920s. Woodrow Wilson, of course, knew that he'd been outmaneuvered by the banksters in signing the Federal Reserve Act into law. Central banks owning the country's economy, putting the country's economy into the hands of private bankers. In this country, I think we're paying $91 billion a year now in interest, and of course that all goes into the pockets of the private banks. Mervyn King has announced yet another round of quantitative easing, which means giving the banks the right to put more money out into the economy. But of course, putting more money out into the economy is a euphemism for putting it out as loans. It's loans. So it increases the debt burdens on the individuals, on businesses, and of course on the nation. All helping to create the opportunity to create more Greeces. Unless you do what Iceland did, which is say, we're just not going to do that. We're going to create our own currency. We're going to create our own currency. We're going to issue that currency in return for people doing community projects. And if businesses need to borrow currency, they can borrow it and pay an interest rate, and the interest will come back to the people of Iceland, thereby preventing future generations from inheriting a massive debt burden to the private banks. Now, over the last couple of years or so, in presentations, I've jested and said, look, so don't be surprised if sometime in the next few years you start reading reports that Iceland is suspected of having weapons of mass destruction. Well, you won't be aware of what happened last week because it hasn't been reported in any Western mainstream media. But it would be about 10 days ago now, an Icelandic trawler was fishing on the cusp of the 200-mile fishing zone. It was in its own territorial waters, and the US Navy fired across its bows. Basically telling the Icelanders that they were not going to be allowed to fish in international waters. So Iceland, of course, which prior to its fishermen thinking they could become bankers, relied very heavily on its fishing industry for foreign income. And basically what is happening here is that the international financial community is using its mercenaries, i.e. in this case the US Navy, to restrict Iceland and make sure that Iceland can only fish inside its own territorial waters. So this is the international community now putting pressure on Iceland because they've given the bankers the finger. So they didn't need weapons of mass destruction this year. But this is the clue here. This is the clue here. Total control of the planet or get off my earth. Joseph P. Farrell wrote a book a few years ago called Babylon's Banksters. And in that book he secured an interview, in preparation of that book, he secured an interview with a former close associate of the Rothschilds. And this close associate supposedly revealed to Joseph Farrell that the Rothschilds absolutely and unequivocally believe themselves to be the direct descendants of the demigods, of Nimrod and Tammuz in particular. And they actually believe that they have a divine right to rule over humanity because they are a superior species. Now, it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. Well, it does, but for the purposes of the discussion, it doesn't matter. The issue is they believe it. They absolutely believe it, and their whole ethos is built around this, that humanity is a sub-species to be treated as little better than cattle or slaves at best. But this is starting to get us into the underlying agenda here of what's really occurring. Because all the way through history there have been people who have tried to put into the public domain their understanding or their insights, their knowledge about this bloodline, these bloodlines, who believe themselves to be the direct descendants of the demigods. And in most cases they paid with their lives because they didn't have any means to sort of put it out on a mass scale. So they might be sharing it with a few people, but once word got back to the people in the bloodlines, then they sent out their assassins to dispatch with them. And this is what gives us the opportunity to take a look at what's happening right now. We're going to go back initially anyway, to the Bible, to Genesis chapter 6. If you ask any priest or Orthodox theologian to discuss Genesis chapter 6, I can assure you that they will run a mile. Because it's a part of the Bible, along with almost the whole of Ezekiel, that they don't want to talk about. So what is so significant about Genesis chapter 6? Well, I'm just going to read you the first 4 verses. It says, "And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the Elohim," which is a plural, it means gods and goddesses, with a small g, "that the Elohim saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for he is also flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. It goes on, there were giants, Nephilim, in the earth in these days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men. That's biblical speak for shagging. And they bore children to them. The same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. Now, this is the only biblical reference which actually alludes to the earlier texts from Samaria and Arcadia. We've actually only been able to interpret those texts, and many of them have only been returned to us through archaeology over the last couple hundred years or so. But what we know from those ancient texts is that this is from sort of 2,000 years at least after the earlier Sumerian Arcadian texts, which tell us from more than one source that humanity was created, was genetically engineered as a slave race. It doesn't answer the whole creation issue, because what is understood is that there were hominoids here on Earth, and when this other race, which are known as the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came, and they had been here apparently for many, many tens, if not hundreds of thousands of years, before they eventually decided to participate in genetic engineering and mixed their own DNA with the DNA of the hominoids that were occupying the planet at the time. We also know that from many, many sources around the world that this current iteration of humanity is not the first. It's at the very least the fourth. And we know from the various folklores and mythology, history, whatever you want to call it, from various sources, various indigenous peoples, that basically there were previous iterations. So this current iteration of humanity may literally be just a few thousand years old. We know it's at least 5,500. We don't know how much before that, because we certainly have no, as yet, written information to confirm that one way or the other. You know what's happened here? Somebody hasn't plugged my laptop in. Oh yeah, it is. No, it says it's on full power. Oh, there we go. My apologies. The laptop was indeed plugged in, but there's no problem here, guys. If I was a conspiracy theorist. Anyway, outside of the Bible, there are other texts that have also been returned to us, literally in the last, less than 100 years. Because we have the Nag Hammadi texts, which were returned to us in the mid-1940s. And then we have the Dead Sea Scrolls, which was 1947. The Nag Hammadi texts have, as far as we know, all been deciphered, and all of that information is in the public domain. The Dead Sea Scrolls were a different matter, mainly because the Vatican and Jerusalem took control of them, so there's only snippets available in the public domain. Now I just want to make a reference to a couple of documents, one of which was certainly in the public domain before the Nag Hammadi and Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, because that's the Book of Enoch, which was discovered or rediscovered back in the 18th century. But in the Book of Enoch, and I would encourage you to read the Book of Enoch, because I think the Book of Enoch is absolutely critical to what's occurring right now. Now, I recorded a much more detailed version of this presentation 6 years ago, in July of 2006. And here we are, in 2012, and I'm even more convinced that I may not be exactly right, but I'm not far off the mark. In the Book of Enoch, we have further reference to the Elohim, the Nephilim, and the angels, the children of heaven, saw them, handsome and beautiful daughters, and desired them. And they were altogether 200. And they descended into Argos, which is the summit of Hermon. And they called them Mount Armon, for they swore and bound one another by a curse. Now, this really sort of expands on, you have to sort of take into account that this is in English, it wasn't written in English, it's been through various iterations and interpretations. But this is the Elohim, and the angels, i.e. those who from heaven to earth came, the children of heaven, saw them, which is the human women, the genetically engineered human women, handsome and beautiful daughters, and desired them. And they were altogether 200. So what we know from various sources, this is repeated in the, this is a summary, a synopsis of what's mentioned in the Sumerian Akkadian text, which talks about this group of, in fact it talks about 300 actually rather than 200, 300 watchers who committed the crime, and the crime was screwing around with the human women. Because humanity had been created as a slave race. The Anunnaki was superior to humanity. The DNA was supposedly not compatible. We also know from the Sumerian Akkadian texts that there were many, many deformities of the children who were born from this group that were having sexual relations. So they weren't doing Bill Clinton, they couldn't deny it. They were having sexual relations with the human women. Anyway, their government, their ruling body, basically said, well look, we're heading out of here, we're leaving planet Earth, but you're not. You're not. Seeing as you like the human women so much, you can stay here. In fact, we sentence you to stay here. And you will stay here, and it's up to you how you rule the domain. Well, they knew that they were being sentenced, and they swore and bound one another by a curse. From the book of Jared, which did come out of the Dead Sea Scrolls, it says, in the days of Jared, 200 watchers descended on Ardis, the summit of Mount Hermon. On this mountain, the watchers swore an oath and bound themselves to it. So we see the same story coming from multiple sources. No direct relationship between these sources. So this is history. It's not mythology, it's history that found its way into these respective sources. Back to the Book of Enoch. And it talks, in the Book of Enoch, it goes into great detail about how the watchers, and it names some of the watchers, like Azazel taught men to make swords and daggers and shields and breastplates. And the statement was that from now on you will not ascend into heaven for all eternity, as it has been decreed that you will be bound on earth for all the days of eternity, which we're going to see in a second was actually contradicted a couple of verses later. It goes on, and before this you will have seen the destruction of your beloved sons, and you will not be able to enjoy them, but they will fall before you by the sword. So basically what this is saying is that the watchers are being sentenced here, this 200 or 300, they were being sentenced to stay here. The sentence duration was not going to be revealed to them, but at the end of the sentence, their sons, their descendants, would effectively be murdered. It was in the destruction of your beloved sons. You will not be able to enjoy them, but they will fall before you by the sword. And he, if we go back to the Sumerian text, we believe that he, or many scholars believe that he is a reference to Anu. Anu. Not God, Anu. The head honcho from wherever it was that the Anunnaki originated. says he was angry with them and bound them until the time of the consummation of their sin in the year of mystery. The year of mystery. So basically, what these guys are told is, we're not going to tell you what the sentence is, but you're bound here until the year of mystery. Well, what I'm going to share with you is that I believe that the descendants, or those who believe themselves to be the bloodline descendants of the Watchers, have a pretty good idea what the year of mystery might be. And they've known it for a long, long time. Well, when this really came into the public domain, there was one guy who'd done a lot of research on the subject. And when he put it in the public domain, it provided a piece of the jigsaw that I didn't have. I had a lot of the pieces of the jigsaw, but this was a piece I didn't have. And then this was about 2004, when I was researching this particular aspect. And I stumbled across this guy's work. There's a guy called David Flynn. Tragically, he passed on a couple of years ago. But David Flynn came up with a remarkable observation. What we know from all of these texts is that the Watchers were put here on Mount Hermon. Now, Mount Hermon sits in the anti-Lebanon range, just to the north of Israel, just to the west of Syria. So it's just sitting over the border in Lebanon. And I read this guy's work, and I thought, this is it. This is absolutely the piece of the jigsaw I've been looking for. David Flynn came up with the observation that Mount Hermon sits in a remarkable location on the planet. It sits at 33.53 degrees. Now, originally, David Flynn said it sat at 33.33 degrees, which actually isn't correct. It's 33.53, but I'll share that very important differential with you in a minute. 33.53 degrees east of the 0 degree meridian, and 33.53 degrees north of the equator. Now, before you all rush out to Google Earth and put 33.53 degrees east, let me share with you that this is based on the 0 degree meridian as it was prior to 1886. Up until that point, the 0 degree meridian went down through Paris. It's called the Rose Line, the Roslin. The Roslin. And it was moved. In 1886, it was moved to go down through London, such as the arrogance of the British Empire. Moved it from Paris to London. So you have to make an adjustment today, which is 2.06 degrees, to take account of the fact that it moved from Paris to London. Well, 33.53 degrees is a very, very interesting number because the planet is 21,600 nautical miles in circumference. And so if you divide 33.53 by 360, i.e. the number of degrees in the circumference, and you multiply it by 21,600, you come up with 2,012 nautical miles. So Mount Hermon sits at 2,012 nautical miles north of the equator and east of the 0 degree meridian as it was prior to 1886. The gremlins have really got into the projector here, haven't they? Well, I didn't put this into any public presentation because I knew that I needed something a little bit more concrete to demonstrate that those who believe themselves to be the rightful rulers of the planet were concerned about Mount Hermon and about the year 2012. And I was going to give a presentation in Glastonbury in 2006, and I had the presentation all prepared, and then literally about 10 days or so before I gave this presentation, that final piece fell into place. In 2006, the Israelis baited Hezbollah by putting one of their troops into no man's land. They literally told him, I probably know, maybe a joke, they told this guy, go sit in a truck and go sit in the middle of no man's land and just wait. Well, Hezbollah, of course, should have been smart enough to know that it was a trap, but unfortunately they fell for it hook, line and sinker, supposedly, and they captured the guy. Well, Israel used that as an excuse to launch their attack on southern Lebanon. Initially, I thought they were going to go for the Litani River. I thought the whole idea here was to attach the Litani River into the Israeli water supply and supplement the fresh water that they were getting from the Jordan, because we know that they were bleeding the Jordan dry. But it wasn't the Litani River. And when eventually a ceasefire was agreed, the Israeli government refused to honour the ceasefire for 3 days. And for 3 days, they flew hundreds of sorties flying around Mount Hermon, and they literally surrounded the whole area with cluster bombs. So this whole area today is completely inaccessible. And when I read this, I thought, of course. They're establishing effectively a protection zone around Mount Hermon. Now, how arrogant is this? How incredibly arrogant. You know, if 2012 is the year of mystery in which whoever it was that put them here is going to come and take them off and deal with their descendants, if they think that cluster bomb technology is going to prevent that from happening, I think they're in for a pretty big shock. Well, that's what they've done. That whole area is completely and utterly inaccessible. Well, what are the clues? What are the clues to say that they've known about this before? Well, I'm just going to share one with you tonight because I think it's a very, very significant one, but there are others through history as well. Because they're working on the basis that one way or another, whoever it is that put them here is monitoring the planet, and therefore, you know, taking an interest that either they've got their spies here, or they've got the technology to be able to observe from afar, whatever. But one of the most significant aspects of this is the nuclear bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. The war was over. There was no military reason whatsoever to drop these monstrosities onto civilian populations. But the choice of locations was not random. If you look at the epicenter of where the Hiroshima bomb was dropped, it was dropped at 34 degrees north of the equator. Nagasaki is a few miles south, and Nagasaki sits at 32 degrees north. When you bisect the two, guess what you come up with? 33.53 degrees. I don't believe that the choice of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were in any way connected to any military decision. They were connected to whomever it was who took the decision to bomb these two cities, trying to send a message. Not particularly in deep code either. To send a message to whomever was looking in on them that if they came here, they were going to get a welcoming committee. And once again, how arrogant can you get? How arrogant that a couple of nuclear bombs can deter whomever it was that put them here. Even the Trinity location of the test bomb in Arizona fits into this play. So consider the possibility that these guys believe that the year of mystery is 2012. And when I first postulated this in 2006, when I recorded a presentation called Hidden Agenda 2012, and in that presentation I said that we are going to see an acceleration of the agenda to establish total global dominion before the end of 2012. Because basically these guys want to be able to say, well, you know, what are you taking us off with? We've got total control. We've got the total control of this planet. Total control. And that's why they're going for broke right now. They're going for broke. They've got the bit between their teeth. And this seal on the back of the $1 bill, the Great Seal, the separated capstone. The separated capstone. And we're going to see that in a very prominent position, of course, in the Olympic Stadium. The separated capstone represents the knowledge and the wisdom of the few, never never to be shared with the masses. And anyone who is part or is initiated, inducted into their secret societies, who thinks they can share this information with the masses, of course pays the ultimate price. Yeah? So that should be your first clue that I have not taken any oath. There are rules to this game, and you have to know, like all games, you know the rules. Yeah? But if you break the rules, you've got to know what to expect. But and that's why, for a lot of people, that's why in the universities, in both the US and in the UK in particular, but also in other countries, that's why these guys have their stools, I like that word, shits. They have their stools, their stooges, in the universities, identifying the best and the brightest. So that, because they actually believe that they can spot their own. By the way, one of the belief systems of those who think they are the rightful rulers is that they are tied into this physical realm. And that each time the physical vehicle expires, their soul is not allowed to escape this physical realm. And that they immediately reincarnate into the next available human vehicle within their respective bloodlines. They also believe that the more they contribute to establishing the global control, the higher up the pecking order they will come, the more seniority they will have in their next incarnation. Which is why you see socio-psychotics like Kissinger and Brzezinski, who actually aren't even part of the bloodline. They are just the socio-psychotics who sold their soul to them. But that's why you see these guys who are in their 80s becoming even more outrageous. I mean, this is not human, is it? You know, most people who reach the age of 80, I mean, they're looking to enjoy their twilight years, spend more time with the family, you know, to relax, enjoy their final years on the physical mortal coil. But these guys, no. Become even more aggressive. Kissinger and Brzezinski, of course, are the epitome of that. Even symbolically, they will never allow the capstone to be reconjoined with the pyramid, and this was evidence at the millennium in Egypt, when the Egyptian government was going to try to milk the tourist opportunity of the millennium. So they commissioned Jean-Michel Jarre to perform one of his sound-like spectaculars on the Giza plateau. And the pièce de résistance of this performance was going to be the lowering of a gold capstone on top of the Great Pyramid, Cheops, that's the one with the top missing. Well, when the powers that be heard about this, they basically told the Egyptian government, no you're not, it's not going to happen. One way or another, it's not going to happen. And even if you think you are going to go ahead with it, better think again, because all your foreign aid is going to dry up. Well, what we do know is that the Jean-Michel Jarre performance went ahead. But what we don't know is what happened at midnight. Because something truly remarkable happened. At 11:30, a cloud came across Cairo. And it worked its way. And at 11:30, it literally enveloped the whole of the pyramid. And the projection was going on, but the projection was just onto this cloud. It wasn't going on to the pyramid. And some of the projection even included this symbolism. And then at 12:30, on the morning, 12:30 a.m., on the morning of January 1st, 2000, the cloud continued on its path. So we have no idea, actually, whether or not a gold capstone was indeed put on that pyramid, because it was totally enveloped in cloud. So, but this is just an illustration of the fact that even symbolically, these guys will not allow this pyramid to be conjoined with the pyramid, because that would represent the knowledge and the wisdom of those who think they're the rightful rulers of a planetary fiefdom being shared with the masses. Well, right now there's some very interesting things going on, because more and more people are starting to wake up to what's occurring here. You know, Zbigniew Brzezinski in 1969 wrote a book called Between Two Ages, the Technotronic Era. And in the book, and I'm going to paraphrase, he made the observation, he said the challenge for Western governments will be to keep their people locked into consumerist materialism, preventing them from realising who they truly are. Just think about that observation. It's a very poignant observation. And I think when even people reading it in 1969, 1970 probably didn't really appreciate what he was alluding to. This is the same guy who, a little over 2 years ago, in May of 2010, in two speeches, one to the Council on Foreign Relations and reportedly the other one to the Bilderberger Group in Sidges, he said that the biggest obstacle to establishing the one world government is the rapid political awakening of the masses. So something is happening here. More and more people are starting to understand what's going on. I mean, 6 years ago, when I really put this information into the public domain for the first time, it would have been absolutely unthinkable that I would have had, was it 100 or something people here? We might have got 3 or 4. But such is the speed with which the realisation of things is occurring. Not least, of course, because you see it all around you. You see it all around you. The unemployment, the rising unemployment, the collapse of a healthcare system, euthanasia being practiced in the healthcare system. In the Daily Mail, 100,000 people a year die needlessly because they're not provided medication. And it's deliberate choice. They have a term for it. I think it's called like the death pathway or something. What do they call it? The Liverpool pathway. Why? It was pioneered in Liverpool. Well, if I was living in... I don't know, I wouldn't say that. But so we're being told, I mean, it's part of the process here. We're being told what's occurring. I read an article today, it said a coroner's hearing, had a 22-year-old who ended up calling the police because he needed water. And this is at Tooting Hospital, St George's Hospital in Tooting. And he couldn't get the medical staff to give him any attention, and he wanted water. He ended up phoning the police to try and get the nurses to give him water. And when the police arrived, the nurses wouldn't let the police in to see him. They told the police he was being taken care of, and the guy died. That's the report that was published today from the coroner's hearing. And this is euthanasia by any other name. These guys are desperate. They're desperate. But you know what? We have something that they don't. We don't realise it. Well, unfortunately, at the moment, the vast majority don't realise it. More and more people are waking up to it. And that is, we do have the capacity to ride through this. It means stepping out of our existing paradigm in terms of the left-brain consciousness, which these guys have created. But these guys rely on keeping us in fear. Keeping us in fear. Fear that we're going to lose the roof over our head. Fear that we're going to lose the ability to feed ourselves. And one of the things I want to do in this first half of the presentation is just offer a couple of pieces of advice and guidance as to what we can do to help alleviate that fear. It's very, very simple when we actually think about it, but nonetheless, very, very few people are doing anything about it. In Iceland, when the newly elected government, which was mainly women, by the way, the attitude in Iceland was the men fucked it up and the women are going to have to put it right. And there's a lot of truth in that. There's absolutely a lot of truth in that, you know. Getting the male ego out of the way, getting the testosterone out of the way. By the way, you know that testosterone is the drug of choice in Goldman Sachs. That's admitted. Admitted, drug of choice. And we're not talking about the natural, bulbine, the natural testosterone. We're talking chemical testosterone amongst the male and the female employees, because it helps to suppress the compassion within us. Well, when the women of Iceland came to power, they made a couple of announcements. The first one they said was that nobody's going to lose their house. Nobody's going to lose their house thanks to a mess caused by the bankers and having nothing to do with the people of this nation. And actually more recently, they've been through a program of debt forgiveness. And what they've done is they've alleviated some of the pressure by telling people that they were only going to pay the same percentage in terms of mortgage on the adjusted value of their house versus the artificial value that they borrowed it against when they bought it in, say, 2006. But now what they've done is they've effectively said whatever your house is worth today, the maximum mortgage liability you have is 110%. And anything above that is forgiven. And the banks are just going to have to eat it! Do we see anybody saying that here? No. The second statement that the women made was that nobody is going to starve. Nobody's going to starve. Now, admittedly, this is easier to do with a country of 300,000 people, but it's the microcosm. I mean, it's the template. And of course, we should, over the last 3 years, have been looking and exploring the Icelandic template and looking at how we could establish that template here. But no, because that would mean that the bankers can't take total control. So what we've got to do is make sure that we are prepared. Now, first things first. The only thing you should have in the bank right now is an overdraft. If anybody has anything other than an overdraft in the bank, just be ready to say goodbye to it. Because the crash, by the way, let me tell you that to have nothing right now is actually arguably a pretty good position to be in. Right? Because you're not going to worry too much about losing anything, are you? Because you haven't got anything to lose. Having material wealth is not an issue. There's no issue with that at all. The issue is attachment to it. Bear in mind that what's coming, if you don't do something about it, who is going to own it? The bankers. The bankers. One could also argue, well, I'm not encouraging it, that right now it's a great time to build up a massive debt. And if you have the opportunity to borrow money, do so. I'm going to share what you can do with that in a moment. But in Italy, on May the 31st of this year, one of the largest banks in Italy, BNI, told their customers that basically they would not be able to access their accounts until July the 1st. That was on May the 31st. They announced it at midnight, and they said, effective immediately. So all of the customers of BNI in Italy have been having to write IOUs because they can't access anything in their account. Well, that could well come here. Pretty much came here last week in NatWest.
Yeah.
They called it a systems meltdown. No. There was a problem. Yeah, NatWest, part of RBS, Royal Bank of Scotland, I think they had a problem. They needed a few days respite. And they didn't want people rushing to take their money out of their accounts. So they had a systems failure. Yeah? They didn't want to do another Northern Rock, where it was announced that Northern Rock had a few problems and there was a run on the bank. But if you're going to take your money out of the bank, you've got to do something with it. What are you going to do with it? Well, this is what's happened with gold over the last 10 years. And I had to smile because I picked up this local paper today and it said, Brighton house prices jumped 206% in a decade. Woo! Okay, the reality is that Brighton house prices have halved in value over the past decade. Because to establish real growth, you have to look at what's going on with gold. So back here, actually Brighton hasn't fared quite as badly as much of the rest of the country. But back here, you needed 363 ounces of gold to buy the average house in this country. Today, you need barely 100 ounces of gold. So the reality is that the average house in the UK is today worth 27% of what it was 10 years ago. The price of gold is being artificially held down. Every major economic commentator believes that the rug is going to be pulled out from under the global economy in September of this year. So, we're just a few weeks away. Alessio Rossani said, within 12 months, this was last September, he said within 12 months the savings of millions of people will evaporate. He gave a presentation at the financial terrorism event in London a few weeks ago and he said, within 5 months the savings of millions of people are going to evaporate. And most commentators believe that the high-risk period is September because that's when basically everything comes home to roost in the banks. So gold right now is $1,600. I'm not sure what it closed at today, or it hasn't closed yet, but where it's at today, but it was $1,600 on Friday. Most pundits believe that gold will reach $8,000 an ounce somewhere between 2015 and 2017. Silver may have even more upside. Silver's not even £20 an ounce right now, and the forecast is that silver could certainly reach £2,000 an ounce, because gold is measured in dollars, silver is measured in pounds. Silver could reach £2,000 an ounce in the same period. So, if you have an opportunity right now, you get your money out of the banks and you get it into gold and silver. There's no VAT on gold. There's no capital gains tax on gold. Gold coins in law are exactly the same as exchanging 2 5s for a 10. There's no requirement to record that transaction, and it's exactly the same with gold coins. The only cash money that you should have is what you need in the next, say, 2-3 months. Anything else, you really need to think about what you're going to do with it, because after September, October, we could be living in a very, very different world. That's going to be manipulated, and it's going to be manipulated, of course, in the aftermath of the coming event. And that coming event, of course, is the Olympics. 4 weeks away, or 3 weeks away now, from the Olympics. There are so many indications, as there have been for many years. It was 2007 when I first put forward the hypothesis that the Olympics would be used to stage a massive false flag event as a precursor to collapsing the global economy. Now, when I made that observation in 2007, basically people said, Ian, that's outrageous. You know, we're still in growth mode. I said, no, we're not. I said, in fact, we're on the brink. We are absolutely on the brink of the first signs of the collapse. And of course, 1 month after I made that presentation, Northern Rock collapsed. When Northern Rock collapsed, it was using a fractional reserve ratio of 9-1. When Lehman Brothers collapsed a year later, it was using a fractional reserve ratio of 27-1. JP Morgan are rumoured, certainly according to Max Kaiser, who's very well informed, that JP Morgan have oversold their silver holding by as much as 100-1. And every time you buy silver, that's another nail in JP Morgan's coffin. When the collapse comes, the paper money is going to be worth less than a sheet of Andrex. Because a sheet of Andrex will be a lot more useful. It's going to be commodities. Gold and silver, of course, aren't the only commodities. But it's going to have to be something that people will want to trade. China right now is encouraging its citizens to buy gold. Real Madrid have stated that they are willing to sell one of their players for 80 million euros, but they want payment in gold. Now, this should not be any surprise. It should not be any surprise, because what's going to happen over the next few weeks, more and more and more people are going to start to realise that this stuff, the folding stuff in your back pocket, has no future. Or it's going to be like Germany, you know, where you're going to need a wheelbarrow to put enough of it in to be able to go buy a loaf of bread. Now, for the vast majority of people, this is outrageous, it's crazy, it's fear porn. Well, yeah, like I said, it's up to each and every individual to decide for themselves what's occurring here. But you know, the signs today are even more blatant than they were 6 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, when I first put forward this proposition. And what we're going to look at in the second half of the evening, we're going to look at what's occurring with the Olympics, because every day now there's another piece of the jigsaw that falls into place. And although he doesn't know it, Wayne provided me with yet one more piece of the jigsaw about 30 seconds before I came up on the platform here. And I'll share that with you in the second half. So let's take a 20-minute break, get yourself a drink or have a smoke, and see you back here at, let's try with 22:10. Thank you. It's the only presentation I've ever given in Chicago. And fortunately it was recorded. I gave this presentation on Saturday, June the 3rd. 2006. And in this presentation, if you don't want to watch the whole presentation, you can find it, just jump to about 27 minutes. Because that's when I really get to the nub of that presentation. And the core content was that I had predicted that those who believe themselves to be the rightful rulers of the planet were going to use their henchmen to do another 9/11. But this time it was going to be Sears Tower, Chicago. And the reason I told it was going to be Sears Tower because the zip code of Sears Tower is 60606. And Larry Silverstein had just taken out the lease on Sears Tower about 4 weeks before. And the previous 3 weekends it had been shut down for major work on the electrical systems. So once again the template was exactly the same as 9/11 and the London bombings the year before in 2005. And you can hear the audience gasp as I sort of unveil this sort of hypothesis that they're going to go for Sears Tower. And then I said, well, you know, it could be actually not that they're going to go for 60606, but 60666, which is O'Hare Airport, or 60018. It might get clever. 3 times 6, 60018, which was the zip code of the hotel where I was giving the presentation. And you can hear the audience erupt when I said that, you know, basically my flight was booked for the 5th. I was leaving Chicago well before the 6th, that's for sure. Anyway, there was a guy sitting down on the front of the floor here, because the room was packed, a guy called Andy Jones, who'd given a presentation the night before. And there was a guy called Ralph Zimmerman, who has a big following in his New York radio station, and then the lady whose name escapes me for a second, who does Guns and Butter in California. And I said, look, you know, you just get the word out. Spread the word as much as you can, because if these psychotics believe that we've cracked the code, then maybe they'll pull the plug. But the following morning I was asked to give a presentation to a local news crew who wanted to sort of get a 30-second soundbite about this nutter that's come over from the UK and put forward the hypothesis that you know, the Sears Tower was going to be subject to a 9/11 style attack. Well, if that broadcast did go out, and I'm told it did, you certainly can't find anything of that on YouTube, and believe me, I've looked. And of course nothing happened. Sears Tower, which has been renamed, but Sears Tower is still standing. But now if you Google Sears Tower terror attack, what you'll find is that I think it was on the 23rd of June 2006, a terror cell was arrested in Miami with detailed plans of Sears Tower. It was a Patsy terror cell. It was an organisation, I think they called themselves the Seeds of David or something, but nobody had ever heard of it before. It was clearly a concocted terror cell, just like the same template of the 4 young Muslims who were persuaded to participate in test runs, security test runs in London, and then unfortunately, of course, got themselves shot in the process at Canary Wharf. But Annie gave this presentation with me in Chicago, and Annie has sort of continued to give talks all around the world on her involvement with MI5, and certainly she has some very, very interesting stories to tell. I haven't seen Annie speak in probably about 3 years now, so I'm sure she has some very interesting material to share with you tomorrow. So if you're around tomorrow, do come along and see Annie Mashon. It seems that we've still got something literally on the blink, if we can deal with that. Well, going back to what I was talking about the first time, I was talking about obviously gold and silver. There was one thing I should also mention. I'm only talking about buying commodities once you've taken care of the basics, which of course is food and water. So the priority literally between now and probably September is to stock up on food and water, because this is like the Icelandic government telling people that no one's going to lose their house and no one's going to starve. It takes away the fear. And the important thing right now is to get yourself into a position a bit like Alessio Rastani, where he goes to bed every night dreaming of the next depression. Well, Alessio spoke at the recent financial terrorism events, and when I was speaking with him after, he was taking the same precautions that I'm advocating right now. He's making the same preparations, but for slightly different reasons. But it doesn't matter what you perceive. He perceives it to be purely a financial collapse. I perceive it to be something more than that. But the preparations need to be the same. And of course, if you know that you've got 3 months' food in your cupboards, and you've got 3 months of bottled water, so that even if the worst comes to worst, you can shut your doors, pull the blinds, and hunker down whilst the craziness goes on. Because let me tell you, I mean, I was in Brighton today, and I saw more people today than I would normally see in about 4 months. When the smelly stuff hits when the smelly stuff hits the fan, the vast majority of those people have probably got maybe a day or 2 days food and water in their house. So what do you think is going to happen with all local supermarkets? They're going to be empty in a heartbeat. You just need to get yourself into a position where you don't care. Where you can let it all go on around you, because we're going to work through it. Sometimes we have to go deep into the abyss before we start to find the way out the other side. And we're not yet at the bottom of the abyss by a long stretch. So over the next few weeks, if you haven't done so already, I would absolutely encourage you to start having a stock of food and water, tin foods. If you're going to have dry food, you've got to make sure you've got enough water to make sure you can rehydrate those foods. Tin foods, forget the sell-by date or the use-by date, they'll last forever. But just have that stock. So the Olympics, 3 weeks away. It's 5 years ago. My gosh, doesn't time fly, we're having fun. 5 years ago. It was June of 2007 when Lord Coe unveiled that. I hope I've got no epileptics in the audience, by the way. Because as you remember, the Sun ran a headline basically saying, "Cause epilepsy." Well, basically it's just shite, isn't it? £400,000 was what the Olympic Committee spent on this piece of art. Well, when it was released, once again, I knew there was something not quite right about this, but the ultimate trigger for me was when I watched an interview with Seth Coe, and he was effectively defending this. He was basically being asked as to how the hell they could ever justify spending £400,000 on this. And he didn't say, well, we like it. He said, this represents something that we fundamentally believe in, and we will not be changing it. And when I heard him say that, and I was watching him say it, there was some conviction there, and I thought, hang on a second, there's way more to this than meets the eye. And of course it was in the Fool Me Once presentation, a month later, that I unveiled this. The Zion logo. And then a young lad called Rick Clay, who happened to be in the audience for that presentation, took this work and took it to another level. And he, of course, identified that actually Zion was also contained within the Beijing logo of 2008. But I had made the observation the year before that London was going to be established as the New Jerusalem. Because those who think they are the rightful rulers of the planet, amongst them are those who believe themselves to be members of the lost tribe of Ephraim. And they believe themselves to have the ascendancy. And therefore they want to establish London as the New Jerusalem. Now in that presentation from 2006, there's a few copies of those DVDs over there. But in that presentation in 2006, I was drawing very heavily on the work of Adrian Gilbert. And Adrian Gilbert had published a book called The New Jerusalem. He published it in about 2002. And in that book, he pulls together all the threads which illustrate how over the centuries, now in fact there has been an agenda to establish London as the New Jerusalem. And with everything that was unfolding, the attack on Lebanon, and then the awarding of the London Olympics. Well, the awarding of the London Olympics, of course, was the day before 9/11. 7/7. Remember that, don't you? London was still partying. London was still celebrating being awarded the Olympics when the bombs went off on the morning of 7/7. So here we have the Zion logo. Well, of course, it was in this same presentation that I put forward the hypothesis that these guys would go for broke. And then another 9/11 or another 7/7 wasn't going to cut it for what they wanted to achieve. They had to absolutely go for the jugular. And in doing so,
I put forward the hypothesis that they would stage something of enormous audacity, so audacious that it would rock the worldview of the vast majority of people on the planet. So I put forward the suggestion that they would actually stage a fake alien invasion. Now that's not exactly original, because we can actually trace the first suggestion that a fake alien invasion could be used to accelerate the goal to establish a one world government back to 1917. And the comment was made by a guy called John Dewey, who was then the Secretary of State for Education, the US Secretary of State for Education, and he was one of the team that was tasked with coming up with some kind of global cooperation mechanism, global governance, to prevent a repeat of the catastrophe that was World War I. Of course, what they ultimately came up with was the League of Nations. That didn't work very well, did it? Because 20 years later, of course, we were back at war again. But during the course of their discussions, John Dewey supposedly said, of course, this task would be so much easier if we had a threat like an alien invasion, because then everybody would obviously unite under one banner, the banner of planet Earth. Well, roll the clock forward to the 1960s, and in the immediate aftermath of the Cuban Missile Crisis, a committee was established, and they met at a place called Iron Mountain in the US. And we wouldn't know anything about this committee were it not for supposedly one of the members who participated in this think tank having an attack of conscience. And so he shared with a journalist a few years later his notes from that meeting. And what was published was a book that is called A Report from Iron Mountain. And that book came into the public domain in 1967. It's also one of the first references that we can find to the idea that global warming could be used to keep the population in fear. Along with drought and famine. Ultimately, they actually came to the conclusion that there was no better fear than war. And to keep the population in fear, you had to create an enemy. Well, they came up with the same observation as John Dewey, and they basically said, in fact, I think I have the quote. That's another quote. We'll come back to that in a second. Here we go. It has been hotly argued that a believable external menace would offer the last best hope of peace by uniting mankind against the danger of destruction by creatures from other planets or from outer space. And then they went on to say, it is more probable in our judgment that such a threat will have to be invented. No shit. Now, that's not to suggest that these guys were denying the possibility of extraterrestrial life, just simply observing that they couldn't be relied upon to turn up on cue. So 1967. Then of course we have Werner von Braun, the German scientist responsible for the development of the V1 and V2 rocket program in Germany, who was of course whistled out of Germany at the end of the Second World War and effectively became the prime mover for NASA. And he supposedly told one of his assistants in 1974 that they had to be very careful of those who wanted to establish a new world order, a global government. He said they're going to use fake terror threats. Then they'll go on to the threats of asteroids. And then he said, supposedly, the last card will be the fake alien invasion. And then we have Ronald Reagan, of course, in the 1980s, and particularly in 1988, where he made a speech to the United Nations, and when he said, I often wonder how quickly humanity would unite if we were facing some enormous external threat, like an alien invasion. So these guys, it's their wet dream to be able to stage an alien invasion and effectively subjugate humanity even further. Well, of course, Orson Welles was given the task of putting the trial run out on Halloween in 1938, when he broadcast his version of War of the Worlds, and he broadcast it as a news bulletin rather than as a script. and that literally had the whole of New York State in panic because of the news item that was telling the population that there was an alien invasion. Well, in 2007, when I was putting forward this proposition, I used the trailer from the film Independence Day. Now, Independence Day was released in 1996. It's 16 years old. But the computer graphics on it were pretty damn amazing. But you look at the current releases of this type of genre of alien attacks on the Earth, and the graphics are incredible. And all you've got to do is simply take off the movie tag and present it as news, and the vast majority of your EastEnders watchers would believe it. And your Corrie watchers. And of course, one would argue that this mindscaping, this preparation, has been going on for some time. Not least, I think it was in 2009, children traumatised by War of Worlds abduction of teacher. Now this is a report from Burgess Hill. But what was later established was that this was a government initiative, and that schools all across the country had been invited to participate in this exercise, where the kids at school were not told that it was an exercise, but basically they were led outside and there was an alien craft there. And in this particular case in Burgess Hill, the teacher was supposedly abducted by the aliens. The 370 children at South East Junior School, Burgess Hill, West Sussex, just up the road from there, saw a spaceship crash near their school, and then aliens grabbed a member of staff as part of the performance. But of course the kids weren't told that it was a performance, and some of the kids were seriously traumatised by this. Well, at the time this appeared, the journalists thought that it was a one-off, and it was a brainchild of somebody at the school in Burgess Hill. And that was when, of course, after this article appeared, people came forward from all over the country and said, hey, we're just saying exactly the same. It's starting the process of the mindscaping. Now, last August, I gave a version of this presentation, and the title of that presentation was called The Nephilim, Disclosure and Transhumanism. And I gave this at the Geopolitical conference in Leeds last year. Now there's a guy called Nick Pope in the audience. Anybody heard the name Nick Pope? Yeah. Now Nick is absolutely unique because Nick believes that governments don't lie. Anything that your government tells you is the truth. And if you don't believe it's the truth, there's something wrong with you. And Nick routinely sort of throws in, well, these people need some psychological help because they refuse to believe the official version of events. And in the presentation, you'll find this on YouTube, by the way, but in the course of the presentation, I am actually asking, I said, okay, how many people in the room believe that 9/11 was perpetrated by 19 Muslim hijackers wearing box colours? Of course, one hand goes up, Nick. All right, Nick Pope. Surprise, isn't it? And then the same with 7/7, Nick Pope. Nobody else in the room believes it. But Nick, absolutely, of course, Nick has signed the Official Secrets Act, as he constantly reminds people. Well, after I gave that presentation, Nick put a statement on his website. And he said, one of the most bizarre conspiracy theories being discussed at present is the idea that a fake alien attack will be staged at the 2012 Olympic Games in London. Believers think alien invasions, sci-fi movies and documentaries are part of this plan, preparing us psychologically for the idea of an extraterrestrial attack. I'm personally sceptical of that false flag alien invasion theory, but it's a fail-safe prediction because if it doesn't happen, its supporters will doubtless claim that by exposing the details, they prematurely exposed and therefore thwarted the New World Order's fiendish plans. Well, Nick made that comment after this appeared in The Sun a few days after that event. And the Sun reporter was at the event at Nick Pope's invitation. And Nick Pope introduced the reporter to me and suggested that she might be interested in my hypothesis about fake alien invasion. And I absolutely am convinced that Nick's motivation was to get the mainstream media to present me as an absolute nutter. Well, there was only one problem, and that was that I happened to have a whole bunch of supporting documentation. I had the transcript of John Dewey's statement from the 1917 discussions about the League of Nations. I had my copy of the report from Iron Mountain. I had on my computer Carol Rosin repeating her discussion with Werner von Braun, and I had Reagan's 1988 speech from the UN, plus some other material. And to be fair, the young Sun journalist spent about an hour and a quarter with me, and I looked through it, and at every stage I said, now do you have any questions? I said, do you think these are genuine documents? I mean, etc., etc. And at the end of the interview, she said, you've certainly given me some food for thought. So the article that appeared, you'll find this obviously on the web, was actually not a hit piece. And I can imagine Nick Pope went, shit! World's powers will fake alien invasion of the Olympics to keep us living in fear. And I actually said in the course of, do I actually have the transcript of that? I'm sure, but I actually said, look, I don't care. I really don't care if people call me a nutter. I said, look, I don't care if people call me a nutter. I hope that by spreading word about what's going to happen, I can help save thousands of lives. If enough people know about it in advance, then the attack will not be carried out. I'm simply sowing the seed in the mind of the public. By the way, I also showed her the short clip from Chicago, and I showed her the news reports about the terror cell being arrested 2 weeks later. So basically I was making it very difficult for her to just go and write a random hit piece. So actually it served the purpose. It actually served the purpose, much to Nick Pope's chagrin. Well, Nick Pope appeared in the Daily Mail a couple of weeks ago, and Nick Pope says, keep an eye on the skies for flying saucers during the Olympic Games. UFO expert Nick Pope says massive summer events like the Olympics would be a prime time for an alien encounter. You fucking what? Ministry of Defence has planned for the worst outcomes. Attack and invasion. We should be prepared for even the most seemingly unfathomable. Now Nick Pope is simply trying to make sure, because he refers to himself as the go-to guy, he is the media's go-to guy, anytime there is any hint about UFOs. He also makes a career, a very lucrative career, out of providing promotional material for the films with the UFO theme or games. Now, unbeknown to Nick, I came into possession of a document. It actually says top secret on the top, but it's a bullshit document, because what it is Nick writing a brief for a game called Burning Skies. But it shows you where Nick's mindset is, because in this brief he talks about the government plan. Of course it's all made up, supposedly. The government plan that in the event of an alien attack, the first priority would be to capture one and get them to pull them down and carry out experiments on them so that we could establish their weaknesses. Well, basically I think Nick's trying to ensure that in the event of an alien invasion, Nick is on the BBC and he can say, well yes, actually this is a craft that we first saw about 20 years ago. We think it comes from Zeta Reticuli. Because if they don't get Nick Pope, they'll get Jeremy Clarkson. But what is Nick doing here? What is Nick doing here? Well, Nick has been asked a question, and his comment is that this was part of the publicity for Burning Skies. But there is no reference to the game in the article at all. So what is going on here? Why has Nick Pope jumped on the UFO bandwagon? And by the way, the article as it appeared online had these incredible graphics with it, all part of the mindscaping. And of course, I mean, those of you who have seen some of my presentations will know that a lot of the videos that have been put out to promote the Olympics over the past couple of years or so have all contained UFOs. Here's another one. This is actually from a software game, but this is one of the photographs or one of the pieces of art that they used on the Daily Mail website to help beef up Nick's comments about aliens. Well, you know, it's not only Nick Pope, because Michio Kaku appeared on US TV late last year. You know, in fact, funnily enough, about a week after my article had appeared in the Sun. And Michio Kaku actually said that he thought that an alien invasion would be an excellent opportunity to kickstart the economy. And this guy is a quantum physicist. Anyway, he was followed a few weeks later by Paul Krugman, who's also a Nobel Prize winner, and Krugman basically said the same thing. You know, what the world needs right now is an alien invasion, because that would absolutely give the economy the opportunity. Of course it would, because it would get the defence industries all fired up, spending money that future taxpayers would have to finance if we continue down the existing paradigm. But then we look at what's going on in London, because this is the most heavily militarised Olympics. I mean, we have no idea about the military context of the Berlin Olympics in 1938, 36, whatever. But this is outrageous. We've got a helicopter carrier here coming up the Thames with basically flying tanks on board. Royal Navy's largest ship is sailing up the River Thames ahead of the major security exercise in preparation for the Olympics. And we have this 10-day exercise with typhoons flying all around London. And then we've got missiles on the tops of blocks of flats. I mean, yeah, we had the Jubilee weekend. The security for that was pretty low key. One would argue even non-existent, and yet, you know, that would surely present a much softer target. But something really is going on here, because when the missiles were put on the top of a flat in Bow, I think I've got to hear the next slide. This is the tower on top of this old industrial building. It's been converted into apartments, and it's got missiles on the top of it. And then in the parks all around Hackney Marshes, got these missiles. I mean, you unleash these in a city like London, where are they going? And if they bring something down, where's it coming down? Anybody going to be in London on the Olympics? No. Now this is also interesting. By the way, the people who live there, you might not be able to finish. I'm going to be in the big park. Good luck. Anyway, this is one of the flyers that was put out by the residents in East London. They wanted to hold a meeting at the end of May about the missiles. Do we want missiles in our community? MPs there and everything else. I mean, of course, they're totally ignored by government. I mean, there's no interest, there's no debate, no discussion. And the way the residents found out about this was because they had flyers put through their doors saying that there was going to be missiles. Nothing to worry about. But there's going to be a factory of missiles on the roof of your apartment blocks. Not that you'll be a target. Anyway, the guy who blew the whistle to the national press was served an eviction notice 3 days later, because they were supposedly advised in confidence. Well, just on Saturday, they had these massive protests, which of course, you didn't see anything about this in the British media, did you? No. I had to find this from foreign media. And there's nothing, I couldn't find anything in the British media about these marches in London of people protesting about the missiles in the East End. Just completely outrageous. So something's not right here. Let's look at the architecture. This monstrosity, the Acer-Metal bullshit piece of art, whatever it's called, it supposedly has been nicknamed Baphomet. there's much debate about what this boat. But look at this. Recognise this? Yeah, the separated capstones, the Great Seal, all around the Olympic Stadium. And we've seen a little bit in the press about Danny Boyle's opening ceremony, haven't we? Yeah. And what's the song that's going to be played there? Jerusalem. Jerusalem. The New Jerusalem. And supposedly, he's going to have as the opening scene England's green and pleasant land. But if you take a look at it, it's actually a depiction of the human brain. And this area here, the cerebellum, the motor skills area, I don't know, I'm still working on this. And then down here, we have Glastonbury Tor, a depiction of Glastonbury Tor, the heart chakra of the UK. This is the opening scene. And then it goes to this, the dark satanic mills. What do we have here? When this was picked up, this was an aerial photograph, obviously, that was taken, unauthorised, and the London Olympic Committee were asked what this was, because it looks like the Thames. The response was, oh no, it's not the Thames. Any comparison with the Thames is purely coincidental. But it is the Thames. Oh, it's the Thames, period, it's the Thames. But what have we got here? Because actually when you take a closer look at this, what it looks like is it looks like a typhoon has gone through a timber yard. It's a complete mess. And the only thing standing is the phallus, the industrial chimney breast here, and this, I tell you, it looks like it's supposedly an 80-foot tall statue, and it looks like the Grim Reaper. And this just looks as though it's devastation. So England's green and pleasant lands, in the guise of the human brain, being turned into a wasteland. This is July 27th, the opening ceremony. I've always, well not always, because back in 2007 I didn't have a specific date, but about 3 years ago I kept having the sense that the closing ceremony was going to be the real target here. The last time that the closing ceremony of the Olympics fell on August the 12th was in Los Angeles in 1984. And the closing ceremony at the Los Angeles Olympics consisted of a UFO supposedly being suspended on a helicopter. But there's something not right, because the UFO is shown, and admittedly the footage is a bit grainy, but the UFO is shown literally coming in like and then stopping like that above the stadium. And the commentator says, well, that's a UFO being suspended on a 130-foot steel cable from a helicopter. But the laws of physics would suggest that if something came in like this, it would go but it doesn't. And then after that, this alien in a suit, looks like a white Darth Vader suit, with 6 fingers, comes up on the stage and says, we want to congratulate humanity on coming together and sporting prowess. And of course, the vast majority of people take it as an act. Was it? We don't know. We don't actually know. But that was August the 12th, 1984. August the 12th. In the film District 9, the closing scene, if you haven't seen this film, don't waste an hour and a half of your life.
That's good.
But in the closing scene, the lead prawn, that pretty much puts it in perspective, turns to the scientist that's been helping them to try and escape, and he turns to him and says, I will come back for you in 3 years, I promise. And when I looked at the release date of the film, it was August the 13th, 2009. In the opening scene of Battle of Los Angeles, when the missiles start falling down on Los Angeles, the date line at the bottom of the screen is August the 12th, 2011. Remember War of the Worlds, Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds?
Yeah.
With Richard Burton reading the text? Okay, we'll go download that on YouTube or whatever when you get home, and you get about 4 minutes in there, and Richard Burton reading the script. It was midnight on August 12th, when the first missile was launched towards Earth from Mars. And the piece of jigsaw that Wayne inadvertently provided me with a few seconds before I came up on stage is he said, did I know that Robbie Williams had actually been commissioned to sing the closing song at the London Olympics? Robbie Williams is now apparently pulled out because his wife is pregnant. But the song he was going to sing was Is There Life on Mars? Is There Life on Mars? Now, of course, this is all a causal. There could just be random pieces of a jigsaw that we put together and we're coming up with something, that is a long way off. But, unfortunately, my track record would be such that, I've got to give it some credence. Because I don't claim any special insight, I simply read the scripts. And so far, I've been right far more often than I've been wrong. So are we going to be looking at something very significant in the Olympics? Well, there's some more clues as well. When I was at the Employment Appeal Tribunal a couple of weeks ago with Tony Farrell, he was being represented by a real barrister this time, a guy called Michael Shrimpton. Now, Michael Shrimpton has a history of a lot of cases involving the intelligence services, and purely random, without any prompting, Shrimpton volunteers, when we're sitting down having a coffee after the hearing, the MI5 have already stopped Mossad from bringing in the mini nuke, which MI5 believed they were going to use at the Olympics to trigger a war with Iran.
Oh my God.
And I said to Michael, I said, so if it was caught, was that the one that was meant to be caught? And he said, possibly. He said, they're still looking for others. But that was Shrimpton. It wasn't prompted. I'm not asking the question. This, by the way, is, an interpretation of what may be going on here. Now, this is the Glastonbury tour depiction, according to Danny Boyle. Is that what Michael Shrimpton was talking about?
I think I'm already there.
Let's not deny there are those who right now are gagging for a war with Iran. I mean, they're focusing on Syria. But, like Kaku and Krugman said, if we get a war, we can reignite the economy. As far as the Rockefeller Foundation are concerned, when they put their think tank report together called Strategy for New Technology in 2010, where they discussed a fictional scenario where an event occurred at the London Olympics, killing 13,000 people. You'd be amazed, they wouldn't, how many Rockefeller Foundation fictional scenarios actually become real. The security for this event is the responsibility of G4S, Group 4 Security, an amalgamation of Group 4 and Securicor, so a British-Danish security company. Now, on the face of it, you might say, well, this is interesting because if we look at the track record of previous events, Israeli security companies aren't very good. It was an Israeli security company that was responsible for security in the World Trade Center on 9/11. It was an Israeli security company that was responsible for the security in all the airports where the planes took off on 9/11. It was an Israeli security company, by the way, that was responsible for the cameras in the Pont de l'Arme tunnel that were all facing the wrong way when Princess Di was assassinated on August 31st, 1997. It was an Israeli security company that was responsible for all closed circuit television on the Madrid Underground in March of 2004. It was an Israeli security company, you get the picture. It was an Israeli security company responsible for the CCTV on the Tube on July 7th, 2005. An Israeli security company responsible for the CCTV on Stagecoach buses on the same day. The head of Transport for London at that time was a guy called Bob Kiley. a former member of the CIA, member of the Council on Foreign Relations, the highest paid civil servant in the country, earning a salary of £700,000, $1 million a year, and it was subsequently revealed that he was also an alcoholic. Was he an alcoholic before he was put into the role in London or after? Did he become an alcoholic because of what he knew occurred and had to cover up? We have an Israeli security company that put the cameras inside the nuclear reactors at Fukushima a few weeks before Fukushima was pushed into meltdown. Nothing to do with the earthquake or the tsunami. It was a standalone event. So here we've got good news. We do not have an Israeli security company responsible for security at the London Olympics. There's only one problem, and that is that Group 4 Security is blacklisted by the EU because of its relationship with Israel. Group 4 Security are blacklisted by the EU, who aren't the good guys, by any stretch of the imagination. But they're blacklisted because Group 4 Security provides the private security for the political prisons in Israel, holding the Palestinians, providing the private security on all the West Bank settlements, and providing the private security on the borders between Gaza and Israel, and the West Bank and Israel. Questions have been asked in Parliament, in both houses, as to why Group 4 Security, when it's blacklisted by the EU, has been awarded a £284 million contract to oversee security at the London Olympics. In fact, it's been proven that Group 4 Security are not up to the job. Even The Sun published an article about 10 days ago stating that part of the contract was that they had to have sniffer dogs trained in sniffing explosives going around the stadia 3 times every week. Well, Group 4 Security have now admitted that they haven't got enough dogs trained in sniffing explosives, so they were basically asking their employees, have you got a dog? can you bring it in and just sort of take it for a walk around the stands so that we can actually claim that we are fulfilling our contract and have a dog sniffing explosives? The only thing this dog's interested in sniffing is another dog at the bar. Well, it's got even more outrageous because literally in the last few days, here we go, that's the report on the government being asked about G4. But in the last few days, it's been very interesting because this guy, who was outed today, well, he outed himself, Channel 4 outed him. This is a guy called Ben Fellows, but he was operating under the name of Lee Hazeldine. He got himself a job with G4S, and basically he was exposing G4S as a complete shambles. You know, drug deals going down in the classrooms, and the instructors simply asking the guys to do it outside. Uniforms going missing. He was also claiming that he was tasked with basically trying to smuggle in weapons, guns, knives, explosives, and he got them in every time. He said people were using the wands and they hadn't even switched them on. They're appointing people into supervisory positions who can't speak English. He says it's deliberate. Now this guy has no interest in the wider agenda. Now, this guy is not an analyst of the political agenda. He's an investigative journalist. This is the guy who actually exposed the British establishment links with the IRA and the manipulation of the troubles in Ireland through people like Steak Knife. This guy has a hell of a track record. He gave his first interview to a guy called Tony Gosling on Friday week ago. Over the past 10 days, the reason he gave his interview to Tony Gosling was because he'd been trying to sell his story, which is what he does, that's how he makes his living. He'd been trying to sell his story to the mainstream media, and they weren't interested. And in fact, he was even told by Channel 4 that this whole subject was a no-go area. Channel 4 have now asked him to retract that statement, but he's actually claimed he's got emails, from Alan Davis of Channel 4 telling him that there was no way any of this information could be published. Anyway, as I say, the pressure was being put on him. Alan Davis actually blew the whistle on him. It was Alan Davis who revealed that it was Ben Fellows. So today, Ben has had no choice. He's revealed himself, and basically he's trying to get as much out in the public domain as he possibly can because he feels otherwise that he might be at risk. So go Google Lee Hazeldine and G4S and hear the interviews that he's done with Lou Collins. He's on InfoWars. I mean, this guy's really got to get the material out. I'm going to meet with him on Friday morning, and the plan is to do a joint presentation in London in the next 10 days or so. So, the whole thing is outrageous. I mean, this is what you've got to get ready for, I think, It says, okay, you've completed the required security protocols, you may now proceed into the Olympic Stadium. The other factor is hardly any Brits have been able to get tickets for the Olympics, which means that London is going to be flooded with people from nationalities all over the world. So any false flag event going down at the London Olympics is going to have global implications. Whatever it is. I mean, it may not be the fake alien invasion. They may not feel they can go the whole hog because, some nutters have been putting this out in the public domain for a few years. One of my guys who's become a good friend of mine, and Ray knows who I'm talking about here, but over the last 18 months, his job has been to train police officers coming in from other police forces around the country about their role in coordinating the work with the Met Police. And he said, I always finish my presentations to these guys with the same thing. I always say, lads, we have got to be prepared for anything, and I mean anything. He says, listen, I've got a mate who thinks there's going to be a fake alien invasion at the London Olympics. How fucked up is that? He says, but I've sown the seed. I've put the seed in their mind so that if anything outside of the official script goes down, these guys will be suspicious. But of course, Lee, by the way, has also identified some other disturbing facts. 200,000 of these coffin linings have been imported into the UK. Foreign troops are coming into the UK via Woolwich Barracks every night on Chinook helicopters. Many Americans, but many other nationalities as well. When Ben asked whether or not there was any possibility of continued employment after the Olympics, he was told, oh, you don't need to worry about that, son, because there's going to be a defining event in London, and continued employment is a given. So when he asked what this defining event was, the response was, so he doesn't know. But Lee, like I said, Lee has no interest in the wider political agenda. His concern was to expose the inadequacies of G4S, and he's done a pretty damn good job on that front. But of course the reality is, never forget the magician's trick of watching this whilst everyone's eyes are focused on the Olympics. There's a piece of floating scrap iron in the Persian Gulf right now. It's called the USS Enterprise. Not Captain Kirk's, no. This USS Enterprise is an aircraft carrier, a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier with nuclear weapons on board. It's due to be decommissioned later this year. Just like the Twin Towers were due to be demolished at great expense within the next few years after 2001. What a convenient way to get rid of the ship. And I mean, of course, if we find that Larry Silverstein was taken out the least on the ship, that would be pretty much a giveaway, wouldn't it? But certainly, the world's eyes, 3 billion people or whatever are going to be watching the Olympics. Well, whilst they're watching London with what's going on over here? Because there's a nation sort of down here that is gagging for an attack on the London Olympics. Well, I've got another friend who's trying to spread the word, and he's had T-shirts printed, and he's giving them out for people walking around London. Any large-scale attack taking place at the Olympic Stadium will be a false flag event staged by your own government. Be very, very suspicious. And this is the final one I've got to show you, because this is from the American media. Obama better equipped to handle an alien invasion, says poll. I mean, this guy can't handle anything, but I mean, they're putting Mitt Romney up against him so that he gets another term. But I mean, it's outrageous. Obama better equipped to handle an alien invasion, says poll. Nearly 2 in 3 Americans think President Barack Obama is is better suited than Republican rival Mitt Romney to deal with an alien invasion, according to a survey. Now, the survey wasn't some out there route, it was National Geographic. So what's going on here? All of this mindscaping, something is going on. But I have to bring this to a close. There is no question that something has to change. It has to change big time. These guys, in my opinion, are running scared. They don't know for sure that 2012 is the year of mystery. They're hedging their bets. But they're taking it as an opportunity to go for broke, to establish their global governance, to reduce the population, human population, to 500 million that's in tablets of stone. If you haven't seen the Georgia Guidestones, go Google Georgia Guidestones. The 10 goals and objectives of those who think they're the rightful rulers of the planet. Number 1, reduce humanity to 500 million in balance with nature. Let me tell you, I think this planet is more than capable of determining how many humans it can sustain, and it ain't anywhere near the limit yet. It's only if you take the profit out of war, you'd have peace. If you take the profit out of pharmaceuticals, out of drugs, you'd have health. It's all profit related. Profit, greed, and more freaking greed. All in the hands of socio-psychotics. Something has to change. It's up to us. At the end of the day, more and more people are waking up to what's occurring. Like I said, I don't care if I'm wrong. I don't care. I hope nothing happens in London. I hope to God nothing happens in London Olympics. But let me tell you, I won't stop looking for what they're going to do next, because I know that we will just reach the critical mass which would have prevented them from doing it, because it would be too obvious. But then they'll just move on to the next thing, or the next thing. And the next thing that's coming is the global economic collapse. They want to bring the two together. But we have an opportunity. Like I said, at the end of the day, they know that there's 3 tools that we have that can bring them down. We just have to rise beyond the apathy, the willful ignorance, and the application, and start to take a little bit of an interest in the legacy that we are leaving our children and our grandchildren. Because right now, it's a mess. It's a disaster. And not that we have individually contributed to it directly, but we have indirectly, because we don't do anything about it. We just allow it to unfold. There is an increasing level of awareness that this current paradigm is not sustainable. It's changing at a phenomenal rate of knots. And I know for a fact, I feel it. That in the next year we're going to be in a very, very different position. And let me tell you, if these motherfuckers are taken off the planet, I'm going to be first in line to applaud. Because we're not going to have it easy. We're not going to necessarily be able to establish a new society overnight, but we will have the opportunity to build from the ground up and build a sustainable society without socio-psychotics whose sole motivation is greed and power. It's all in our hands. Thanks very much for sharing. I'm just going to leave you with this. It's a picture that I picked from the Occupy movement. And I don't have too many good things to say about the Occupy movement, but this was a great photograph. Thank you.
It's been before, and sure doing now. Thanks Ian for a great presentation.
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll see you all back here tomorrow night for Annie Macken, and again on Wednesday. So for the next 2 nights at this venue. Thank you very much for coming. Good night. Enjoy the evening.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah?
The information where unknown forces strike the edge of ecology.